From the Western Mass News studios in Springfield, this is Western Mass News Getting Answers with Dave Mattson.
Good to have you with us for this week's edition of Western Mass News Getting Answers on this Thanksgiving weekend. Every week I'm joined by political and business leaders and other newsmakers to talk about the issues that impact you each and every day. This week we're getting answers from about the state of the economy from Associate Professor of Economics at Western New England University, Karl Petrick. All of us are dealing with the country's highest inflation rate in more than 30 years, up 6.2% over the past year through October. Prices are up for everything from gasoline to used vehicles to a pound of ground beef. Don't have to tell you. It's putting an even heavier burden on families already struggling because of the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Time permitting, we're going to focus on the current state of the economy, its impact on the holiday shopping season, and where the country's economy may be headed. That's the big question. Karl Petrick, good to see you. Thanks for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
You know, prices keep going up, and people want to know, who can I blame?
Oh, I wish I could tell you who to blame. This is a global phenomenon. We're seeing this across the board in the U.S., in Britain, even Japan, by their standards, has seen a big spike in inflation. And this is really the starting of the economy kind of rebooting itself after the COVID shutdown to a large extent. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about here is the Consumer Price Index. That measures about 77,000 different goods and services in the United States. They do 2,200 different outlets, and they compile that every month. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does. And so what we've seen, really just part of this year, this big spike in prices. In fact, that's the first graphic that I'd like to show you, is looking at what we had since 2018, mm-hmm. which was we got used to really low prices. And what we're seeing here, this is annualized monthly data, which means we take January 2018 and we're comparing to how did the prices change compared to the January 2017. So that's also where we get that 6% jump recently. It was really low. The overall average price change up until I think March this year was 1.6% from January. So we got used to low prices. In fact, as you said, 30 years. So longer than all my students' lives.
That puts it into perspective.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, a fair chunk of most people's life, we had an annual inflation rate of 2%. And that was it. And then you can see starting in April, things changed. And if we zoom in on the April data, the 2021 data, we see we're still chugging along on that average. Yeah. And we saw a price spike jump in March to 2.6%. Okay, we're still, and then it shot up. And we went from, 4.2%, 5%, to the latest numbers in October, 6.2%. And you have to go all the way back to December of 1990 to see when we had a monthly annualized rate that was roughly comparable. It was a little bit higher in 1990. So this is sticker shock for all of us because we hadn't seen this before. We're not used to it. That's partly how it feels. Our expectations were prices are going to chug along, somewhere around 2% growth.
Yeah, we're in our comfort zone.
Yeah, comfort zone, yeah. But then it's 6%, 5%, and then you feel that. And that's part of what we're dealing with there, just the overall shock to our own wallets of this price index going up.
I keep waiting to see, and I remember this from the mid-'70s, the buttons whip inflation now from President Ford. Remember those?
I do remember those, actually. That was part of the campaign in '76.
We need that now.
Yeah, and so that's a big part of it, was just that was a big change. What we're seeing now, compared to the early '70s, it's a good comparison in terms of just the price. There was a whole combination of things in '73, '74 that happened that caused that became a campaign issue in '76. And again in 1980, because 79 price spike too.
Sure.
This time round, it's really to do with, again, that overall recovery from a very deep recession that we had, and the rebound as companies reopen, as they start to order things. We get these big backlogs in ports, which is a big part of it. Wages have gone up, but nowhere near prices, so that's not part of the equation. And our spending levels in the U.S. have kind of got close to their long-run average, so that's not an answer too. It wasn't all this money came in from the stimulus packages and now we're spending it. That doesn't explain what's happened with prices, as it turns out. Neither does the fact that wages are going up. It really seems to be a supply issue as the global economy reboots.
But again, one of those things that, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we really couldn't gauge it or see it coming more than anything else. And I guess that's the fallout from anything else, just the impact down the line that COVID has had that we just couldn't see.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And that's where, as I said, the Consumer Price Index has so many different goods and services in it. And it's very interesting to look at it. And we break down just the October numbers just a little bit. And we can take a look at what's called the headline Consumer Price Index is the all items index. That includes everything. And that's where we got the 6.2% jump in October. And then a lot of that is energy prices. Energy prices October year to year from 2020 to 2021 jumped by 30%. And gasoline prices, now people didn't know the percent, but you've been feeling this for a while, almost 50%. Gasoline prices jumped by 49.6% October 2020 to October 2021. And that's what we're feeling. And then food prices have also gone up year to year in October by about 5%, 5.6%, I think. They started rising earlier, even during the pandemic, because of food processing plants had big COVID outbreaks, and that they've been, then it came back down again as those got solved, and it was gone back up again. So we've been feeling it most keenly at the grocery store. As you said, meat prices, poultry prices, milk prices, all these things. Hey, cookie prices went down October to October, by the way, by a little bit. But virtually everything else went up, I mean, and by a fair bit. But we've been also feeling that for over a year. And then gas prices really started going up right when we saw the increase in core inflation. That's when the demand for oil, as more transportation, people flying again, more shipping, and also more manufacturing at a global level.
The prices going down during COVID because the demand wasn't there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we can see if we look at October 2020, why we weren't talking about this a year ago, is the core rate of inflation, the headline rate of inflation was 1.2%. Energy prices had dropped. Gas prices had dropped. They were lower than they were the year before. And while food prices had gone up, we weren't feeling the effects because we're still filling our tanks up for about $20 a gallon, and food prices were, what they were. But now, with those two core items, those two key items, and everybody's budgets have shot up, we're really feeling it.
So a lot of this being triggered by the fact that the economy is starting to bounce back?
Yeah. A large part of it. So it's hard to have good news with inflation that jumps like this, but that's really the cause of it. We've seen unemployment come down from a peak over 14% during the pandemic shutdown to, was it now about 4%? Sorry, checking my notes so I get that right. 4.6% in October.
4.6%, yeah.
So a lot of people are back being hired. That's still increasing. We'll see what next month's numbers are, and that's all a rebound. And again, we're seeing that not just here in the U.S., but we're seeing that elsewhere. But the turnaround time, as the economy really, I thought, I'm going to age myself quite a bit here. This reminds me of a blue screen crash on a computer, what happened to the global economy. And for people that were doing their PhDs in the 1990s, this is exactly you'd freeze, and you'd have to wait for the computer to come back to see how much work you just lost that hadn't got saved. It's almost like that with the global economy. And as a result, it's really, these changes are being fed into price increases, particularly in the really vulnerable ones that we cut out of what we call core inflation because they're very volatile, food and energy.
Right.
The expectation going forward over the next year is still heightened inflation numbers, kind of seeing 3% maybe in 2020, 2.5% 2023, and then coming back down. But at the same time, the growth rate for the U.S. economy that's being predicted, these are coming from the Conference Board, it's the most recent data I could find, predicting 5% growth in 2021, which is about par where we are right now, 3.5% in 2020 and 2.9% in 2023, and then back down to our average growth rate is somewhere between 1.5% and 2%.
All right. On that note, we're going to take a break.
Yep.
All right. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at who's getting hit hardest by the inflation, plus inflation's impact on our retirement accounts, too. Stay with us. Welcome back to Western Mass News. Getting Answers. My guest this week is Associate Professor of Economics at Western New England University, Karl Petrick. Karl, let's talk about what's the overall state of the U.S. economy?
The overall state of the U.S. economy is looking pretty promising.
Yeah.
We had in the first half of 2020, which is when actually the recession was, the U.S. economy shrunk by 5.5%, which is a huge downturn. Overall in 2020 was 3.4% because we saw a strong rebound in the second half of 2021. And so the economy is growing, and it's growing pretty fast. So really what we hoped for is called a V-shaped recession, where you hit the bottom and you get really strong growth back. And that's happened. It slowed down a bit this year, but still very strong growth, which is good news. And in terms of the likelihood of that continuing, like I said, every projection I've seen is predicting 2 or 3 years of above normal growth before we start to head back down towards our trend, which is say about 2% growth. So that's really good news.
Now, is a lot of that based on the fact that hopefully that the COVID numbers will go down and we will get back to a normal, or well, whatever our normal is?
Yeah, we're not sure what normal is going to be anymore. That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Certainly really scary in terms of the Delta variant and the new variants that are out there and how they're affecting areas in the U.S. and pretty much everywhere. So that's still an unknown. But even with that uncertainty, like I said, in places like the Congressional Budget Office in the United States or the International Monetary Fund internationally tend to be on the downside of their projections. They tend to be very conservative and pessimistic. And they're predicting 2 or 3 years of pretty fast growth in the United States, much faster than we've had, along with subsiding but still aggravated inflation numbers from what we've had previously.
Now, during all this, the markets seem to have held their own.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are retired, or semi-retired, I guess we could call it, that our 401ks and our IRAs are still doing fairly good. Is there any concern about that as we move along?
Maybe in terms of where you've invested, in terms of if you're in growth stocks, for example, which tends to be tech heavy. They did quite well, of course, in the shutdown because everybody needed Zoom, people needed new laptops, people needed new tablets, so that was doing really well.
Sure.
And maybe the value stocks are better options now, which are the ones that grow slower but tend to have that kind of constant return. Although if you're retired or even semi-retired, even they keep dragging you back in, you probably have your portfolio already balanced that way, so you won't be affected. But yeah, the market's really kind of shrugged off what's going on and gone back to growth, and that's again good news for everybody's retirement portfolio.
Who gets hit hardest by inflation?
People on fixed incomes get hit hardest. I mean, and people that are lower income generally, because they spend more of their income. So again, that's where those grocery bill increases really since 2020 have hit the hardest, and also gas price increases more recently. And this is also why we're seeing the big increase in Social Security this year as I think a historic one, but you can see why. With the price index jumping to over 6% just in October, to help people on fixed incomes, you're going to see those kind of programs increase the amount of money they're allocating for that, precisely for that reason.
Yeah. The other part, too, is the housing market. I know where I am in Southampton, the housing prices have gone through the roof. Look at the impact on prices of housing and the impact on interest rates, too.
Yeah.
The potential impact. Yeah.
Potential impact, yeah. I mean, interest rates have still stayed fairly low. When the Federal Reserve Bank gets concerned about inflation, they'll often raise rates. They've been so far reluctant to do so. I think that's a good thing. Ironically, we would talk December 1990 is the last time we had inflation this high. That was a peak, and then inflation rates came back down again. And I think the concern right now is, are we reacting to these price increases just as we hit a peak and the inflation rate starts to come back down again? You don't want to jump on the brakes and cause a economic recession or even a big slowdown when we really still need to keep the economy growing just to keep ourselves on a strong footing as we come out of this recession.
You know, we touched on in the first segment on the global trend impact in the shape of our economy. How much of an impact does that have on what happens in this country?
Quite a bit,
Yeah.
quite a bit. And we saw, like with the Great Recession, for example, and that was a very slow recovery, really went on for over a decade. And part of the problem why Wall Street recovered within a year, but Main Street never felt it, was because such a slow change in unemployment levels. So that's really what we were feeling. Of course, slow changes in price levels too. But this time around, we've seen the rebound in unemployment as the economy really kind of gets back on some kind of footing with still lots of uncertainty and lots of changes going on in the economy. But again, in the short term at least, which I'm really by that I mean for the next year or two, we're seeing a lot of these changes fed into the price level because output is not, keeping up. It takes longer to start producing stuff again, even services, after that kind of a shutdown.
Yeah, and I think probably the other part of that is too is we don't, as we buy things day in and day out, we're not thinking about what's being exported into this country, and that's the whole flow of goods in return, right?
Yeah. And the consumer price index does include imports because it's part of what we consume as households, and that's where you see what we know about the supply chain and how the ports are full up. A lot of demand as it came back fed into goods,
right,
and less so in services, which is part of that backlog. There's some evidence the backlog is easing, and there's also some evidence that it's not. But that's the thing. Do we want to base our economic policy on the weakest link of the chain? Do we want to slam on the brakes, raise interest rates, and all that stuff because Los Angeles ports clogged up? I think the pain would be worse than the medicine in that particular case. So I think we need to just be ready for a bumpy ride. And there are some things the government can do to help with energy prices, at least, both state and federally, which they may do. I know Congressman Delgado from New York just last week wrote a letter to President Biden asking him to release oil and I think natural gas as well from the strategic reserve to help put prices down. So we haven't felt that yet. The utility gas prices have shot up over 20%. Year on year. We're just starting to feel like it's just starting to get cold. And also at the state level, I know Governor Baker had released plans to increase the availability of home heating oil support for people that need it. And so definitely look into that if you're at all hurting regarding energy, the energy costs. There's some help available local and state as well as maybe some federal as well.
All right, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about inflation's impact on what we're in right now, the holiday shopping season. Welcome back to Western Mass News Getting Answers. I'm pleased to be joined this week by Associate Professor of Economics at Western New England University, Karl Petrick. Karl, let's talk about the holiday shopping season. It kicked off this weekend, although in this day and age it's year-round, but I mean, it's predicted it's going to be one of the most expensive holiday seasons ever, and we're already being warned about shortages and that we should shop early. You see this as a big problem, or?
I think it might be less of a problem than we were concerned about, even last month. One thing that happened is the cost of shipping went up, and you think about this. We're talking about the cost to rent the back of a trailer truck. So if you think that size, that's the container we're talking about. And it used to be $1,000, $3,000. And then it went to $30,000. And so,
Really?
and that was because of scarcity. Because you had ports that had tons of empty containers, and you had ports that had no containers because of the pandemic shutdown, and all the ports have been closed. And so that priced a lot of small companies right out of the market, which is part of the shortages that we're seeing. That caused a lot of delays on getting parts for manufacturing in the United States, and also parts that we send overseas for their manufacturing, all backlogged. The reason why I say it might be a little bit less than we were worried about just came from news last week. Both Walmart and Amazon, Walmart and Target, for example, announced that they had a lot of success getting stuff in. They were renting. They have the money. They rented whole ships.
Yeah.
They weren't renting containers. They chartered whole container ships just for themselves, and so they were able to stock up and get the warehouses back full. For smaller manufacturers and certainly smaller stores, there'll still be an issue. I expect prices to be raised overall, although retail sales, again, compared to gas prices, has been a really small part of the consumer price index in terms of the increase.
Yeah.
In terms of shortages, again, there are some small manufacturers that gave up on Christmas and are gearing towards Easter because their stuff is still stuck on the docks in China, and they're sure they're not going to get it here, so they're trying to get stuff here by the spring. That's still going on, so it's going to be a mixed bag. Shop early if you haven't yet, and it's going to be even crazier if you try later than normal.
And I know it hasn't been predicted to be this, but say consumers do get sticker shock over the holidays and pull back on their spending. Could that put the economy in even bigger trouble?
Certainly in the short term,
yeah.
Definitely. And I think that's part of the problem too. Again, we're spending so much of our incomes have stayed fairly flat if they haven't fallen. If you've lost your job, that they've fallen. We're spending so much on gasoline, so much on food, so much on energy services generally, that we have less money left for retail shopping. And that's a concern going into the holiday season. Would it be enough to cause an overall downturn? No, but it would certainly make the end of this year and the beginning of next year certainly on a more muted footing.
Yeah, now more than ever, I look, because a lot of what we talked about today is short term.
Yeah.
That our businesses now, and maybe not so much the government itself, but are they looking more short term because of the uncertainty of what COVID could bring?
I think we've seen a lot of that. I think businesses have really trying to figure out where demand is going for what they do, and also trying to figure out these fairly short-term supply chain problems that they really have shortened down their window that they're operating in. Government doesn't have to, but certainly I think firms also have their own sort of shock, which came from the pandemic shutdown and then the recovery too. That's also part of it.
We could use more time, but as we look at things overall, are we in better shape than a lot of the people think we are?
Overall in the economy, yes.
Yeah.
Again, not taking away from the fact that we're all feeling the effects of those higher gas prices and higher food prices, and it's a hard time for just about everybody. But this is coming from a recovery. It's coming from a rebound in the overall U.S. economy and global economy, and that's better news than what we're seeing comparing this back to the 1973 oil shock and stagflation. Stagflation happens with a stagnant economy. Our economy is growing. That's the good news to come out of this, as hard as it is and will continue to be for individuals. All right,
we could take more time, and we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do it.
Karl Petrick, Associate Professor of Economics at Western New England University. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for watching too. I'm Dave Mattson. Stay well, stay safe, and if you can, join us next week.